So the SMGs in this game are in a pretty weird spot right now. For the last 2 seasons, Tencent has mostly focused on balancing the rifles, to the point where they all feel like they're in a pretty good spot. While yes, there are 3 or 4 meta rifles that are clearly the best choice, that doesn't mean the rest are bad. I wouldn't say all of them are viable, but they all at least have some niche to work with or to focus on. Now the SMGs unfortunately are not in the same state of balance. The 3 that I would consider meta are the Cordite, the RUS, and the recently added QQ9. And then as for the ones that I would consider still viable but not meta, those would be the PDW and the Pharaoh. This accounts for about half the SMGs in the game, and all the rest I think are just bad. Now I want to make it very clear what I mean when I call a weapon bad. I understand that not every weapon can be meta or even competitively viable, because when you go for that sort of balance, you inevitably have guns feeling pretty much the same. A good example of this is the LK and the KN. Those are 2 of the best rifles and they're essentially clones of each other. How would you make the Chicom competitively viable against the Pharaoh? You would have to basically make it another Pharaoh. So no, the balance I'm looking for is not something where I could take any SMG and expect to do equally well in ranked. But what I do want from guns is for them to have some niche, some role to fill, so that if you use them on a certain map a certain way, maybe you can exploit their strengths and surprise someone. So back to the original question, what makes a bad gun to me is one of 2 things. Either a gun that has no role to fill, so it's mediocre to subpar in every category, or a gun where another gun exists that is essentially a better version of it. Now that all that is out of the way, I want to go through all the SMGs that I think are bad and suggest some changes to them. Do I expect this video to cause Tencent to change them? No, of course not. I don't even expect this video to really catch on. That being said, I just think it's fun to think about. So then, let's start with my current namesake. After a slew of nerfs and buffs, and especially after the introduction of the QQ9, the MSMC has been left in a very awkward spot. My main gripe with the MSMC is that when they nerfed it, they hit it too hard. They went after both its consistency and its lethality. They reduced the max size of the MSMC, and they also gave it more unpredictable and just harder to control recoil. Generally, these are the inconveniences they give to weapons that are super lethal, such as the Pharaoh, but they also went after the lethality of the MSMC at the same time, and not just by a little. At this point, the MSMC kills pretty much on par with the popular rifles such as the KN and the LK. Last season, the Pharaoh started to push it out, but being a burst weapon, it was different enough and it had its own set of inconveniences that I don't think the MSMC was pushed out completely. But this season, the QQ9 is straight up a better version of it. The MSMC has slightly better hipfire, better run speed, and that's it. When you built them both the same, the QQ9 has better reaction speed, much better kill time, and it has 12 more rounds in the magazine. At first I thought the solution was to give it back some of its lethality, but if you go this way, the only way to have it compete with the QQ9 is to bring it back to its glory days. And I'm pretty sure most people don't want the instant melt MSMC to come back. That being said, I think it should go the other way. Increase its consistency significantly. I think we could start with the recoil. I had never considered the MSMC much of a laser weapon, so I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to give it back its old recoil pattern. But if that's a problem, they could go somewhere between the old recoil and what it has now. What it has now is just way too much for the little reward that you get. Next part is pretty simple. It should just get back its 30 round mag. I don't think they realize how annoying it is to increase the shots to kill of a weapon and simultaneously decrease the mag size. Even with the old 30 round mag size, the QQ9 will be beating it pretty handily in this department due to its unique 15 round extended mags. Finally, there's the issue of its range. It actually has quite a good maximum damage range at about 13 meters, but after this it immediately drops off from 5 to 7 shots. I'm not sure why this is the case. They really constrain it to a certain range as if it's super dominant in its range, but it's not. Even if it had a 6-shot range, it's still going to get smacked around by Cordites. With these changes, I think the MSMC would be a very general purpose SMG. It would essentially be what you think of when you think SMG. Fast rate of fire, decent time to kill but not exceptional, and great mobility. Here are the current stats side by side with my suggested changes. Now onto the HG40. The HG40 is one that particularly confuses me. I don't understand why this weapon is the way it is after this long. All you need to do is compare it to the GKS. The GKS beats it at literally every range, and it's not like the HG40 offers something spectacular to counteract that. Yes, the recoil is lower, but it's still no M4. Yes, the range is better, but it's still not a rifle. Really, what's the point of this gun? It almost feels like it's from an earlier build of the game when time to kills were slower and they kinda just forgot to update it. I think the only thing you can do to this weapon is rework it, and that's what I'm gonna suggest. HD-40 was actually a DLC weapon from Black Ops 3, and in that game as well as this one, it's clearly a homage to the MP40 World War II submachine gun. The MP40 is a pretty famous submachine gun, and since Call of Duty used to be a World War II franchise, it's appeared in a bunch of those games. However, the version that most people know nowadays is the version from World at War. That version of the MP40 was very heavy hitting, and in fact beat out a lot of the rifles because it was a 2-shot kill. The HG-40 in Black Ops 3 was actually trying to emulate that somewhat. It was the highest damage SMG in that game. Obviously in this game, a 2-shot kill is not really feasible for a full auto weapon. However, a 3-shot kill is, and we already have the blueprint for that in the ASM-10. My suggestion of giving it a 3-shot kill range at 480 rounds per minute would give it a time to kill that actually only ties with that of the HBR-E3. Now obviously this is still a very good time to kill and decently faster than average for SMGs, but it's still not as fast as a QQ9, and it will be harder to use than the QQ9 up close due to the slower rate of fire. However, I think this would still see use from players who really like the ASM-10 and want an SMG that feels like it. I also think this is the best way to emulate the high damage MP40s from past Call of Duty games. Due to the increased lethality, I would say they need to cut its range a bit, but I don't think it needs other nerfs such as handling or mobility, but that can always be negotiated. I think the recoil would need to be similar to that of the Man of War. Anyway, here are the current stats side by side with my suggested rework. While at first glance this looks like mostly nerfs, understand that the time to kill buff is pretty significant, and it makes the range nerf a little deceptive in that, yes, the range overall will be lower, but because the initial time to kill is faster, it will be killing faster than it currently is at every range. Now onto the Chicom, or Chicom. The Chicom actually surprised me in that I assumed its time to kill was absolutely terrible, but it's 300 milliseconds in its optimal damage range, which is honestly exactly on par for SMGs. However, for a burst fire weapon, this is not good. If you have a burst fire weapon and a full auto weapon that kill in the same amount of time, you're always going to take the full auto weapon, because it's easier to track people with, especially up close, which is pretty important for an SMG. And on top of that, the burst fire weapons in this game react pretty weirdly to drop shotting. Whenever you drop shot and you're aimed down sights, for some reason, if you have your hand on the analog stick at all, it'll unscope you while you're drop shotting, which is pretty annoying. It's the main reason I never liked the Pharaoh despite how dominant it was. So all of these negatives for it having an average time to kill, it just leads to a not good experience up close. That being said, like I said earlier, not every weapon can be meta. I understand that if we made this weapon as good as the Pharaoh up close, it would feel very similar. So I wouldn't mind using this as a mid-range to long-range SMG option, and it honestly works decently for that because the recoil is very low. That's one of its main strengths. Unfortunately, the range on this is absolutely terrible, which kind of contradicts that role for this weapon. It deteriorates far too quickly for it to be an effective mid-range option. So my suggested changes for this gun are actually quite simple. It just needs a significantly better 4 and 5 shot kill range. Here are the actual stats and my suggested changes. As you can see, the only thing I really touched was the range, which doesn't look like much, but the difference between 4 and 5 shots to kill with a burst weapon can be pretty significant, and it can make the weapon just feel a lot more consistent. Finally, we have the GKS. This is actually my second time trying to make this video, and for whatever reason, both times the GKS gave me the most trouble when trying to get gameplay, despite the fact that I know that it's objectively easily the best of the SMGs that I've talked about so far. It's not a bad weapon in that there is a range where it has its own niche. In fact, it even beats the Cordate at that specific range. But it is only one range, and everywhere else it gets beaten by another SMG. That being said, the range where it beats the Cordate is a very common range, one that you'll find a lot of engagements at, so it's not a bad advantage to have. That being said, I don't think its strengths make up for some of its more annoying qualities. Why does it have 25 rounds in a mag compared to Cordate's 40, when the Cordate is already a much better weapon in many different ways? Why does it have slower aim down sight speed similar to that of rifles, when it's not good enough to even challenge rifles at mid-range? So this is going to be the most simple suggestion by far. Just give it a standard 30 round mag and a standard SMG 80s speed. This wouldn't exactly do wonders for the weapon, but I just don't like that they put these seemingly random limitations on an otherwise average gun. that's pretty much it from me. Thanks for watching, and let me know if you agree or disagree with these suggestions.
Hardpoint contested. Hostile hunter-killer drone in.